The interests of each negotiator comprise a fundamental negotiation element. Several times we assume that the interests of other people whom we are negotiating with are opposite to our own interests. And so we look for ways of convincing our counterparts of our point of view. Or we try to win the negotiation by imposing our will, if possible. For example, in a negotiation to buy apples with a reduced price, we assume that the seller is not willing to give us any discount. But let's suppose that on that specific day the seller has a high payment to make and he needs money. It will be better to sell all the apples, even at discounted price, than taking back unsold apples home, because in this case he will have to delay the payment of his bill. After all, if he delays the payment, he'll pay a penalty and maybe interests, while a discount will bring him only a lower profit, or, in the worst case scenario, a lower loss. But the buyer does not know that the seller has an outstanding debt, so he assumes that the seller doesn't want to give any discount. So, or he gives up and buys nothing, or buys without discount, but in a smaller amount than he would like to. If buyer and seller had talked openly about a discount, the buyer could have bought more apples for a lower price per unit, but the seller would take more money in his pocket, enough to pay his debt. In this example, the seller has more interest in taking more money home than in profiting more per each apple sold, while the buyer has more interest in taking more apples for a lower than normal price. If the negotiators know each other and have a good relationship, the process of recognizing the interests of the negotiators is more straightforward. If not, the ideal is having an open conversation, as open as possible under the circumstances. This is not always achievable, as in some board games, the interests of the person whom you are negotiating with are very much against your own. For example, your boss may not want to award you any salary raise, or even want to reduce your salary, while you want to get a salary raise. In this case, you should identify your main interest, staying in the company or getting a salary raise, and negotiate accordingly, identifying the risks you are taking in negotiating. Even in this example, things may not be all or nothing at all. Let's suppose that you decide it's more important to keep your job than getting a salary raise, but your boss values your work and acknowledges that you shall be rewarded. What kind of non-monetary reward could you negotiate with her? Additional vacancy days? Training paid by the company in the following year? If your boss's interest is keeping you in the company but avoiding spending additional money in a salary raise, other negotiating items that not salary can be discussed. The best practice in negotiations is finding out what are the real interests of all people involved, including your own, because so many people start a negotiation without knowing exactly what they really want, and discussing the best way of having these interests dealt with. And when we talk about the interests in a given negotiation, we include the ones not directly linked to negotiations outcomes, like, for example, vanity, saving face, taking more apples home than expected, or avoiding risk, for example, the employee not wanting to lose his job when negotiating a salary raise. Always when we talk about negotiating, we are assuming good faith by the negotiators. Later on, we will analyze situations in which at least one side is not negotiating fairly. The general rule on these cases is stop negotiating, abandoning the meetings, and trying to change the negotiating process, and eventually the negotiators themselves. We'll continue in the next video.